The Last Shelter. When widowed rancher Ethan Cole heard a child scream cutting through a Wyoming blizzard, he thought the mountains were playing tricks on his grief-shattered mind. But inside that abandoned barn, he found 6 starving children and a 7-year-old girl with his dead daughter's face, holding a rusted knife between them, ready to kill him if it meant protecting the others. That moment should have been his end. Instead, it became their beginning. Welcome to a story of survival, redemption, and the family forged in fire and snow. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The blizzard had been screaming across the Wyoming territories for 3 days straight when Ethan Cole decided he wasn't going to make it home. Not that it mattered much. Home was just 4 walls and silence now, a place where dust gathered on Clara's sewing basket and their daughter Meg's hairbrush still sat by the wash basin, strands of copper hair woven through the bristles like the last threads of a life he couldn't bear to touch. 2 winters had passed since the fever took them both within a week of each other, and Ethan had spent every day since then wondering why God saw fit to leave him breathing when everything worth living for had gone cold in the ground. The wind shrieked through the mountain pass, driving snow sideways with such force that Ethan couldn't see his horse's ears. Duke, his bay gelding, had his head down, ice crusting his whiskers, placing each hoof with the careful deliberation of an animal that knew one wrong step meant they'd both die up here. Ethan had ridden out 2 days ago to check his northern fence line. A fool's errand in November, Clara would have said, and she would have been right. The storm had caught him 6 miles from the ranch, and now he was riding blind through a white hell, trusting Duke's instincts more than his own frozen judgment. His face had gone numb an hour ago. His fingers inside his gloves felt like wooden pegs. The rifle across his saddle was so cold the metal burned through his coat sleeve. Every breath was a knife in his lungs. This is how it ends, he thought with something almost like relief. Frozen on a mountain. At least it'll be quick. That was when he heard the scream. It cut through the wind, high, sharp, desperate. A child's scream. Ethan's head snapped up. For a moment he thought his mind had finally cracked, that grief and cold were conjuring ghosts. There were no children up here. No settlements for 10 miles. Nothing but wilderness and snow and the bones of miners who'd pushed too far into these mountains chasing silver. Then he heard it again. Duke's ears swiveled forward. The horse heard it too. Ethan straightened in the saddle, squinting through the snow. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. The scream had come from somewhere ahead, to the left. He touched his heels to Duke's ribs, and the horse moved forward, ears still locked on that sound. They pushed through a dense stand of pine, branches heavy with snow dumping their loads as they passed. The wind dropped for just a moment in the shelter of the trees, and Ethan saw it, a dark shape through the white curtain. A building. Not a natural formation, walls, a roof sagging under snow weight. The old Miller barn. Ethan had forgotten it was even here. The Miller family had tried to homestead this high valley 15 years back, built a barn, and started a cabin before the first winter killed the father and sent the rest fleeing back to civilization. The barn had stood empty ever since, slowly surrendering to weather and time. Another scream split the air, closer now. Definitely coming from inside. Ethan pulled his rifle from its scabbard, checked that his revolver was loose in its holster, and swung down from the saddle. His legs nearly buckled. He'd been in the saddle so long his muscles had seized. He grabbed Duke's stirrup, forced his knees to lock, and stumbled toward the barn through knee-deep drifts. The barn door hung askew on broken hinges. Ethan approached from the side, rifle ready. Could be anything in there. Mountain lion denning up, injured bear, outlaws hiding from the law, or children. Though what in God's name children would be doing in an abandoned barn in a blizzard was beyond his frozen capacity to imagine. He pressed against the weathered wall beside the door, listening. The wind covered most sounds, but in a gap between gusts, he heard it, crying. Multiple voices. Young voices. Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped around the doorframe, rifle raised. The barn's interior was a cave of shadows. Snow had blown through gaps in the walls, piling in the corners. Old hay, rotted and frozen, covered half the floor. The miller's wagon sat collapsed against the far wall, one wheel missing. And in the corner, Huddled together in a mass of ragged clothes and tangled hair were children. 6 of them. Maybe 7. It was hard to tell where one ended and another began. They were so thin Ethan could see the shape of bones through their clothes. Their faces were gray with cold and hunger, eyes huge and hollow. Standing in front of them, positioned between Ethan and the others, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She wore a dress that might have once been blue, now so filthy and torn it was the color of old blood. Her feet were wrapped in rags. Her hair was a matted tangle of dark copper, hanging past her shoulders. And in her hand, held in a white-knuckled grip, was a knife. It was barely a knife, more rust than blade, the handle wrapped in dirty cloth. But the way she held it, the way her whole body was coiled like a spring, ready to fight, ready to kill if she had to. Ethan's breath stopped in his throat, because despite the grime, despite the hollow cheeks and the feral desperation in her eyes, he knew that face, the shape of her jaw, the set of her chin, the way her nose turned up just slightly at the end. Meg, his daughter's face, staring at him across the barrel of his rifle. The world tilted. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It wasn't possible. Meg was dead. He'd buried her himself, wrapped in Clara's wedding quilt, in the plot behind the house next to her mother. But this girl... Get back. Her voice was rough, rasping, barely more than a whisper. But it carried absolute conviction. Get back or I'll cut you. The knife shook in her hand, but she didn't lower it. Behind her, the other children pressed tighter together. One of them was crying, a thin, hopeless sound. Another was coughing, deep rattling coughs that spoke of pneumonia or worse. Ethan slowly lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking, and not from the cold. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. His voice came out hoarse, roughened by cold and shock. That's what they all say. The girl shifted her weight, adjusting her grip on the knife. Before they hurt us anyway. Who hurt you? Don't matter. Her eyes flicked to the door behind him, then back. You alone? Yes. You lying? No. She studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were gray, not like Meg's, which had been brown like Clara's. But everything else, the shape of her face, the stubborn set of her mouth, the way she stood like she'd fight the world itself if it meant protecting what was hers. You need help, Ethan said quietly. All of you. You're freezing. That one's sick. He nodded toward the child who was coughing. You stay out here. You'll all die before morning. We've been dying since we was born, the girl said. Ain't killed us yet. This cold will. Ethan took a slow breath. I have a ranch, 6 miles from here, warm house, food, beds. And what you want for that? The girl's voice was flat, knowing, too knowing for a child her age. We ain't got nothing to trade. The question hit Ethan like a fist to the gut. What kind of life had this child lived that her first assumption was that help came with a price? I don't want anything, he said, just to get you somewhere safe. Safe? She said the word like it was a foreign language. Ain't no such thing. Behind her, one of the smaller children whimpered. The girl's expression didn't change, but Ethan saw her jaw tighten. He slowly set his rifle against the wall and raised his hands. Look, I'm putting down my weapon. I'm going to reach for my coat, slow, and I'm going to take it off. You can have it, for the little ones. Why? Suspicion edged every word. Because they're cold, Ethan said simply. And I've got another coat on my horse. That was a lie. He had a bedroll, but not another coat. But he'd wrapped fence wire in his shirt sleeves in worse weather than this. He could make it 6 miles. He moved slowly, unbuttoning his heavy sheepskin coat, shrugging it off. The cold bit immediately through his wool shirt and vest, but he ignored it. He held out the coat. Take it, please. The girl stared at him. Behind her, the children had gone silent, watching. The only sound was the wind screaming through the gaps in the walls and that terrible, wet coughing. Finally, she spoke. Toss it here. Don't come closer. Ethan tossed the coat. It landed a few feet in front of her. She darted forward, snatched it up, retreated, all without ever taking her eyes off him or lowering the knife. She handed the coat behind her without looking. Wrap the little ones. Maddie first. She's coldest. Small hands grabbed the coat. Ethan heard rustling, whispers. The girl stood her ground, still watching him. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. She hesitated. Then, "Lena." "I'm Ethan." He paused. "Lena, how long have you been out here?" 4 days, maybe 5. Her voice was matter-of-fact. "Lost count." "You walked? In this weather?" "Had to." She shifted her weight, and for the first time Ethan saw pain flicker across her face. She was favoring her left foot. Frostbite, probably. Maybe worse. "Where did you come from?" "North, the Bannock Mine." Ethan knew that name. Bannock Silver Mine, up in the mountains near the Montana border. Rough operation. Rougher men. He'd heard stories about the mine owner, a man named Dalton Cree, but had always figured they were exaggerations. Hard men in hard places tended to acquire hard reputations whether they'd earned them or not. But looking at these children— "You worked at the mine?" he asked carefully. Lena's laugh was bitter and old beyond her years. "Worked. That's a nice word for it. Where are your parents?" Her expression went flat. "Dead, most of them. Sold, some of them. Left behind, the rest." "Sold?" "That's what happens when you can't pay your debts." Lena's voice was cold. "Or when you got something men with money want. You get sold. Contract labor, they call it. Looks legal on paper." Ethan felt something dark and furious coiling in his chest. "These children are contract labor?" "We was." Lena lifted her chin. "Ain't no more. We left." "They let you leave?" "Didn't ask permission?" For the first time, something almost like pride crossed her face. "Tommy busted the lock. We ran when the shift boss was drunk. Walked for 3 days before the storm caught us. Been holed up here since." 3 days. Children walking through mountain wilderness in November. It was a miracle any of them were alive. "Lena," Ethan said quietly, "they're going to come looking for you." "I know." Her knuckles whitened on the knife. "That's why we got to keep moving soon as the storm breaks." "You won't make it. Look at them." Ethan gestured to the huddled mass of children. "Half of them can't walk another mile. That cough, that's pneumonia. Without medicine, she'll be dead in a week." "She'll be dead faster if we go back." "You don't have to go back." Ethan took a slow step forward. "Come with me. To my ranch. I can keep you safe." "You can't." Lena shook her head. "Mr. Cree owns the sheriff, owns the judge, owns half the territory. You hide us, he'll burn your house down and shoot you for theft of property." "You're not property, you're children." "Law don't see it that way, not when there's contracts." Ethan looked at the children behind her. The smallest couldn't be more than 4. The oldest boy, sitting with his back against the wall, looked about 12. Rail thin, watching Ethan with eyes that had seen too much. There was a girl about 9, holding a younger child against her chest. 2 more boys, maybe 6 and 8, wrapped together in Ethan's coat. 6 children. 6 faces marked by hunger and fear, and the kind of hard living that ground souls to dust. 6 children who'd made a desperate run for freedom and ended up trapped in a barn, waiting to freeze or starve or be dragged back to hell. Ethan thought of Meg, of Clara, of the life he'd lost, and the empty years he'd spent wishing he'd died with them. He thought of the loaded revolver in his study drawer at home, the one he looked at some nights and seriously considered. He thought about what it meant to have something to live for. "I don't care about contracts," he said. "I don't care about Dalton Cree or his bought and paid for law. You're children, you need help, and I'm not walking away." Lena stared at him. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind and that wet, terrible coughing. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why do you care?" Ethan could have given her a dozen reasons. Because it was right. Because they needed help. Because no child should have to hold a knife and threaten grown men just to survive. But what came out was the truth. "Because you look like my daughter," he said quietly. "And she's dead. And I couldn't save her. But maybe I can save you." Lena's expression flickered. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been hope quickly buried. "If we go with you," she said slowly, "and Mr. Cree comes, you'll fight?" "Yes." "Even if it means dying?" Ethan thought about that. really thought about it. 2 years ago, the answer would have been easy. He had nothing to lose. But looking at these children, at Lena with her knife and her impossible courage, at the small faces peering around her. Yes, he said, even then. She studied him for a long time. Behind her, the boy with pneumonia coughed again, a sound like drowning. Finally, Lena lowered the knife. All right, she whispered. All right, Bum. Getting 6 half-frozen children 6 miles through a blizzard was the hardest thing Ethan had ever done. They couldn't all ride. Duke could maybe carry 2, and the horse was already exhausted from fighting through the storm. So they walked. Ethan led Duke with the smallest child, Maddie, they called her, wrapped in his bedroll on the saddle, and the boy with pneumonia, Thomas, held in front. The others walked, roped together with the length of line Ethan kept for emergency repairs, stumbling through drifts that sometimes reached their waists. Lena refused to be carried. She walked at the front of the line behind Ethan, still gripping that rusted knife, watching the trees as if expecting armed men to materialize from the snow. It took 4 hours to cover 6 miles. 4 hours of brutal, exhausting cold. Thomas passed out halfway through, and Ethan had to tie him to the saddle to keep him from falling. One of the younger boys, Sam, kept crying that he couldn't feel his feet. The 9-year-old girl, Ruth, carried the 4-year-old on her back for the last 2 miles without complaining once. By the time Ethan's ranch house appeared through the snow, a dark shape against the white, smoke curling from the chimney he'd banked before leaving, he was moving on pure stubbornness and will. His hands were numb. His face was past feeling. His lungs burned with every breath. But they'd made it. He got Duke into the barn first, unsaddled him, rubbed him down with handfuls of hay, covered him with a blanket. The horse had earned his oats 10 times over. Then Ethan gathered the children and herded them toward the house. The front door stuck. It always stuck when ice formed in the jam. Ethan had to shoulder it open. Warmth rushed out to meet them, and the children made small sounds of relief and disbelief. Inside, Ethan said. Quick! They stumbled in, and he shut the door behind them, cutting off the wind. For a moment they all just stood there in the front room, dripping melting snow, staring around at a space that probably seemed impossibly grand to children who'd been living in mine shacks and sleeping in abandoned barns. It wasn't grand. The front room held a stone fireplace, a worn sofa Clara had brought from her family home, 2 chairs Ethan had built himself, a table scarred from years of use. The floor was pine plank, the walls rough-hewn logs chinked with clay. But it was warm. The fire he'd banked was still glowing in the hearth, and it was shelter. The children looked at each other, then at Lena. She still had the knife out. It's all right, Ethan said quietly. You're safe here. Nowhere's safe, Lena said automatically, but her voice shook. For tonight, Ethan amended. Tonight you're safe. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. He moved to the fireplace, added wood, built up the fire. Warmth began to fill the room. Then he went to the kitchen, Clara's kitchen, where her pot still hung on their hooks and her recipe book sat on the shelf gathering dust, and started water heating. You're all half frozen, he called back. We need to warm you up slow or it'll hurt worse. Lena, can you help them get those wet clothes off? There are blankets in the chest by the sofa. When he came back with warm water and clean rags, the children were wrapped in every blanket his house possessed, huddled by the fire. Lena had finally put down the knife. It sat on the floor next to her within easy reach. Ethan knelt by the smallest child, Maddie. She couldn't be more than 4, tiny and delicate as a bird, with huge dark eyes and a gaunt face. Can I look at your hands? He asked gently. She looked at Lena. Lena nodded. Maddie held out her hands. The fingers were white, bloodless. Frostbite. Ethan soaked the rags in warm water and wrapped her hands carefully, then her feet. She whimpered but didn't pull away. He went through each child the same way. Sam, maybe 6, with feet so frozen Ethan worried he might lose toes. Ruth, the 9-year-old who'd carried Maddie, stoic and silent as Ethan wrapped her blistered hands. Jack and Danny, brothers about 7 and 8, pressed together like they were afraid someone would separate them. And Thomas, the 12-year-old boy who'd led the escape. He was burning with fever, his breathing labored and wet. When Ethan peeled back his shirt, He found bruises covering his ribs, old ones, faded to yellow and green, and fresh ones, still purple-black. "What happened?" Ethan asked quietly. Thomas's eyes flickered to Lena. She answered for him. "Shift boss didn't like that Tommy worked slow," she said flatly. "Beat him with a length of chain, 3 days before we ran." Ethan's hands stilled on the cloth. He looked at the boy's face, thin, pale, fever-bright eyes glazed with pain and exhaustion. "I need to get medicine," he said. "There's a doctor in town, but in this storm, no doctor." Lena's voice cut sharp. "No one outside. Mr. Cree's got people everywhere. Doctor might report us." "Thomas needs help. That's pneumonia. Without treatment." "I know what it is." Lena's jaw set. "But we can't risk it. Not yet." Ethan looked at her, the small, fierce girl with too much weight on her narrow shoulders, and made a decision. "All right," he said. "No doctor tonight. But I've got some medicine here. Fever reducer, willow bark for the pain. It's not much, but it might help." He went to the cupboard where he kept his medical supplies, meager as they were, and brought back what he had. He got Thomas to swallow some fever medicine, then made the boy as comfortable as possible on the sofa with every spare pillow in the house. Then he went to the kitchen and started making food. Soup. That's what they needed. Something warm and easy to digest. He found potatoes, carrots, an onion that wasn't too sprouted, salt pork from the cold cellar. He put it all in the big pot Claire used to use for Sunday dinners and set it to simmer. When he came back to the front room, the children were exactly where he'd left them, watching him with wary, exhausted eyes. "Food will be ready soon," he said. "While we're waiting, we should get you all properly warm. There are beds upstairs. When's the last time any of you slept in a bed?" Silence. The children looked at each other. "Never," Ruth finally said. "Never slept in a bed." Ethan felt something crack in his chest. "Well," he said roughly, "that changes tonight." He hadn't been upstairs since Clara and Meg died. The upper floor held 2 bedrooms, the one he'd shared with Clara, and Meg's room, smaller, painted yellow, with the quilt Clara had made spread over the narrow bed. He made himself climb those stairs, made himself open Meg's door. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Her rag doll on the pillow, her small shoes by the bed, the curtains with the flower pattern Clara had sewn. Ethan stood in the doorway, gripping the frame, breathing through the pain. Then he went to the linen cupboard and pulled out every blanket and quilt he owned. He carried them downstairs. "The beds are ready," he said. "Once you've eaten, you can sleep. Real sleep. In a warm house." Lena was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes." "Where's your family?" "Dead. 2 years ago. Fever." "Your daughter?" "Meg. She was 7. Ethan met Lena's eyes. "You look like her. Same face, different eyes, but—" "Same face." Lena absorbed this. "That why you helped us? Reminded you of her?" "Maybe," Ethan admitted. "Does it matter?" "No?" Lena looked down at her hands, raw and red from cold. "Guess it don't matter why, just matters that you did." The soup was ready. Ethan ladled it into bowls. Clara's bowls, the blue ones she'd been so proud of, and handed them out. The children fell on the food like starving wolves, burning their mouths in their desperation. "Slow," Ethan warned. "Too fast and you'll be sick." They tried to slow down. Mostly failed. Ethan didn't blame them. God only knew when they'd last had a real meal. When the bowls were empty, he showed them upstairs. Put Maddie and Ruth in Meg's room. The thought of strange children in his daughter's bed should have hurt worse, but somehow it didn't. Put the boys in the spare room, on the floor, on pallets he made from blankets. Thomas stayed on the sofa, too sick to move, and Ethan wanted him close so he could check on him through the night. Lena stood in the front room, looking lost. "You can have my room," Ethan said. "I'll sleep down here with Thomas." "I'll stay with him," Lena said immediately. "I'm the oldest. I should watch him." "You need sleep too." "I ain't sleeping in a stranger's bed." Ethan understood. Trust didn't come easy when the world had spent your whole life teaching you that trust got you hurt. "All right," he said, "but take the armchair at least. And a blanket." He got her settled, banked the fire, checked Thomas's fever, still high, but not worse. Then he sat in the other chair, wrapped in his own blanket, and watched the children sleep. Outside, the blizzard continued to scream. Snow piled against the windows, the wind shook the walls. But inside there was warmth, and food, and safety, however temporary. Lena hadn't fallen asleep. She sat curled in the armchair, watching Ethan across the firelight. "You really gonna fight for us?" she asked quietly. "When Mr. Cree comes?" "Yes." "You'll die. He's got 10 men at least, maybe more." "Maybe," Ethan agreed. "But I meant what I said. I'm not letting him take you back." "Why?" Her voice was small, lost. "We ain't nothing to you. Just kids. Not even your kids." Ethan looked at her, this child who'd walked through a blizzard and held a knife on a grown man and carried the weight of 5 other children's survival on shoulders that should have only known dolls and games. "You're somebody to you," he said. "That's enough." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back fiercely. "I ain't cried in 2 years," she said. "Ain't gonna start now." "It's all right if you do. It ain't all right. Crying don't help nothing." But her voice shook. "Crying's what weak people do, and I can't be weak, not when they need me." "Being strong doesn't mean never crying," Ethan said gently. "It means carrying on even when you want to. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Lena, and it's all right to be tired." A single tear escaped, sliding down her dirty cheek. She scrubbed it away angrily. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired I can't hardly stand, but I can't stop. If I stop, something bad happens. Someone gets hurt, someone dies, so I can't stop." "You can tonight." Ethan leaned forward. "Tonight I'm awake. I'm watching. Nothing's going to happen to them. You can rest." "You promise?" "I promise." Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Ethan sat in the firelight, listening to the storm and the sound of breathing. 7 breaths, 7 lives, 7 souls who'd survived the impossible and ended up in his empty house by chance or fate or blind luck. He thought about Dalton Cree, about bought judges and contract labor and children beaten with chains. He thought about Clara and Meg, about the life he'd lost and the 2 years he'd spent waiting to die. And he thought about the loaded revolver in his study drawer and how he wouldn't be needing it anymore, because he had something to live for now. 6 somethings. 7, counting himself. A family forged in snow and desperation. Outside, the blizzard raged. But inside, Ethan Cole sat guard over sleeping children, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. The storm broke on the 4th day. Ethan woke to silence, the kind of absolute quiet that only comes after days of howling wind. Pale morning light filtered through the frost-etched windows, turning the front room into something crystalline and strange. He'd fallen asleep in the chair sometime near dawn, his rifle across his lap, and now his neck ached and his back protested as he straightened. Thomas still slept on the sofa, his breathing easier than it had been. The fever had broken during the night. Ethan had woken every few hours to check, to give him water, to wipe his face with cool cloths. The boy's color was better now, less gray, though he was still desperately thin. Lena's chair was empty. Ethan's heart kicked hard. He was on his feet before he'd fully processed the fear, scanning the room. The knife was gone from where she'd left it by the hearth. His coat, hanging by the door, was missing too. She'd run. Taken the others and fled while he slept, back out into the cold because trust was a luxury children like her couldn't afford. Then he heard voices from the kitchen. He moved quietly to the doorway and stopped, hand on the frame, taking in the scene. All 6 children were crowded into Clara's kitchen. Lena stood at the stove. She'd dragged a chair over to reach, stirring something in a pot. Ruth was slicing bread, the knife enormous in her small hands, but her movements careful and precise. Maddie sat on the counter, bare feet swinging, watching everything with wide eyes. The boys were setting the table, laying out plates and forks with the intense concentration of children performing an unfamiliar ritual. They were making breakfast. "More salt?" Lena said, tasting whatever was in the pot. "Ruth, pass it." "We're almost out of bread," Ruth reported. "There's cornmeal in the cupboard. We can make Johnny cakes." Don't know how. I'll teach you. Tommy taught me last winter when Lena's voice caught. She recovered quickly. When we had cornmeal, Ethan watched them work together with the efficiency of a unit that had learned to survive by depending on each other. No wasted movement, no arguing. Each child knew their role. Sam noticed him first. Mr. Ethan's awake. All activity stopped. 6 faces turned toward him, wary and watchful. Ethan raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no threat. Morning. We're making breakfast, Lena said, defensive. Figured we should earn our keep. Found oats and milk in the cold cellar. Making porridge. You don't have to earn anything, Ethan said quietly, but I appreciate it. Some of the tension left Lena's shoulders. She turned back to the stove. Porridge will be ready soon. There's coffee on if you want it. Ethan moved into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the back of the stove. It was strong enough to strip paint, the way he liked it, and he wondered how Lena had known. Probably just made it the way mine workers made it, strong enough to keep you upright through a 14-hour shift. He sat at the table and watched them finish preparing the meal. It struck him how small they all were, how thin, how their movements carried a precision born from scarcity. Nothing wasted, nothing dropped, every grain of oats precious. When they sat down to eat, they waited. All of them, hands in laps, watching him. What is it? Ethan asked. You're supposed to say grace, Jack said. Before eating. That's what Mama used to do. Before. Before she died, or was sold, or vanished into whatever darkness had swallowed these children's families. Ethan hadn't said grace since Clara died, hadn't talked to God since the fever took his family and left him breathing in an empty house. But he saw the expectation in their faces, the need for ritual and normalcy and something that felt like family. He bowed his head. The children followed. For this food, he said slowly, and for safety from the storm, for warm beds and full bellies, for second chances. His voice roughened. We're grateful. Amen, the children chorused. They ate in silence for a while. Ethan watched Lena portion out the food with mathematical precision, slightly larger servings for the boys who were growing, extra for Thomas who needed strength to fight off sickness, smallest for herself, though she tried to hide it. Lena, Ethan said. Take more. There's plenty. This is enough. It's not. You're as thin as the others. I'm fine. You're not. He reached across and ladled more porridge into her bowl. Eat. She glared at him, but she ate. Halfway through the meal, Thomas appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. Tommy! Maddie scrambled down from her chair and ran to him. He caught her with a wince, wrapped one arm around her. Hey, little bit. His voice was hoarse. You okay? We're eating real food, at a real table, in a real house. Thomas looked at Ethan over Maddie's head. Thank you. For everything. Sit down before you fall down, Ethan said. Ruth, get him a bowl. They made space for Thomas at the table, and he lowered himself carefully into the chair, moving like an old man. Ethan could see the pain in every breath he took, the way he held his ribs. The beating he'd taken had done real damage. How long were you at the mine? Ethan asked. The children exchanged glances. Thomas answered, his voice flat. 3 years. Since my father died in a collapse and left debts. Mr. Cree offered to forgive the debt if I worked it off. 3 years? You were 9? Yes, sir. And the rest of you? 2 years, Ruth said. After Mama got sick and couldn't pay the company doctor. 18 months, said Danny. Me and Jack together. Our pa owed gambling debts. I don't remember, Maddie whispered. I've been there long as I remember. Ethan's hands tightened on his coffee cup. And Lena? Lena didn't look up from her bowl. 1.5 years. They killed my ma when she tried to stop them taking me. The words fell into silence like stones into a well. They killed her, Ethan repeated carefully. In front of you. Shot her in the street, said she was interfering with legal business. Sheriff wrote it up as justifiable. Lena's voice was absolutely flat, empty of emotion. I was 5.5. Ethan set down his coffee very carefully, afraid he'd crush the cup. How many children does Cree have working the mine? Maybe 30, Thomas said. Hard to count. Some die. New ones come. And the law knows? The law works for Mr. Cree. Thomas coughed, then continued. He owns the judge, pays the sheriff. Anyone makes trouble, they disappear, or get buried in a cave-in that ain't nobody's fault. What about the mining inspector? Federal territories have— Inspector came once, Lena interrupted. Mr. Cree showed him papers, contracts signed by parents or guardians, all legal. Inspector looked at us, and we all knew, if we said anything, we'd be dead before he left town. She met Ethan's eyes. So we didn't say anything. And he left. And nothing changed. Ethan thought about the system that allowed this, contracts that sold children, officials who looked the other way, laws that protected property more than people. How did you get away? He asked. Tommy planned it, Lena said, for months, watching the guards, counting shifts, waiting for the right time. Thomas nodded. Shift boss drinks heavy on Saturday nights. Gets mean first, then passes out. Last Saturday, he passed out early. I got the key from his belt, opened the barracks. He looked down at his hands. There were 42 children. I told them all. Anyone who wanted to run, we were leaving. Most were too scared. Some were too sick. Some didn't believe we'd make it, Ruth finished quietly. Said we'd just die in the mountains. But we came anyway, Jack said. 6 of us. We came. And Charlie? Maddie whispered. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Who's Charlie? Ethan asked gently. My brother, Sam said, his voice breaking. He was 8. He was with us when we ran. But on the second day, he fell. Broke his leg. We couldn't— His breath hitched. We couldn't carry him. We tried, but he was hurting too bad and we were moving too slow and we could hear them coming, so we hid him, Thomas said, his voice rough. In a cave. Gave him all our food and water. Told him we'd come back for him once we found help. He looked at Ethan. Is that true? Can we go back for him? Ethan's chest felt like it was caught in a vice. A child, 8 years old, alone in the mountains with a broken leg. Even if Cree's men hadn't found him, even if he'd survived the blizzard. We'll try, he said, because he couldn't tell them the truth. Once the snow clears enough to travel, we'll try. Sam started crying, silent tears streaming down his face. Danny put an arm around his brother's shoulders. Lena's jaw was set so tight Ethan could see the muscle jumping. We shouldn't have left him. You didn't have a choice, Ethan said firmly. You were keeping the rest alive. That's what you had to do. Don't make it right. No, but it makes it survival, and that's not something to be ashamed of. Lena looked at him with old eyes. You ever had to choose who lives and who dies, Mr. Ethan? You ever had to leave someone behind? Ethan thought of Clara and Meg, of watching them burn with fever, of choosing which one to sit with in those final hours because he couldn't be in 2 places at once, of choosing Meg because she was a child, and then hearing Clara call for him from the other room in a voice he'd hear in nightmares for the rest of his life. Yes, he said quietly. I have. Lena studied his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded once and went back to her porridge. They finished breakfast in heavy silence. Afterward, Ethan sent the children to wash up while he cleared the table. Lena stayed behind, helping him carry dishes to the sink. We need to leave soon, she said quietly, before Mr. Cree figures out where we are. In this snow, the drifts are 6 feet high in places. Better than waiting for him to come kill you and take us back. Ethan turned to face her. I told you, I'm not letting him take you. You can't stop him. You're one man. Then I'll get help. From who? Everyone in town works for him or owes him or is too scared to cross him. Lena shook her head. You're a good man, Mr. Ethan, but good men die just as easy as bad ones. Maybe. Ethan crossed to the window, looked out at the world buried in white. But I didn't survive 2 years of wanting to die just to give up now. Lena came to stand beside him. Together they looked out at the wilderness, beautiful and deadly in the morning sun. Your daughter, Lena said after a moment. Meg, she was lucky to have a pa who loved her. I was the lucky one. You miss her. Every day. We ain't trying to replace her. We can't be your family. We're just kids you helped in a storm. Ethan looked down at this fierce, damaged child who'd survived things that would have broken most adults. Maybe, he said. Or maybe family isn't just blood. Maybe it's who you choose to fight for. Before Lena could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway. Someone's coming. Every muscle in Ethan's body went tight. Where? Road. East side. Saw them from the upstairs window. 2 riders. Ethan moved fast, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. How far? Mile. Maybe less. Lena, get the children upstairs, the back bedroom. Keep them quiet. What are you going to do? See who it is. If it's Cree's men, it is. Has to be. Nobody else rides out in this weather. Ethan checked his rifle, then his revolver. Then I'll handle it. Go. Lena didn't move. I ain't hiding. Yes, you are. Those children need you. If something happens to me, you get them out the back, through the woods. Follow the creek bed south. It'll take you to the Larson Ranch. Tell them what happened. They're good people. They'll help. Mr. Ethan, go. He said it hard enough that she flinched. Then, more gently, please, let me do this. For a moment, he thought she'd argue. Then she ran, gathering the other children, herding them upstairs. Ethan heard floorboards creak overhead, heard the back bedroom door close. He positioned himself at the front window where he had a clear view of the road and a clean shot if he needed one. The riders were closer now. He could make out details. 2 men on horseback pushing through the deep snow. They were bundled against the cold, but Ethan could see guns on their hips. They reached the front yard and stopped. One of them dismounted, leaving his horse ground-tied. He was big, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a beard crusted with ice. He walked like a man who was used to people getting out of his way. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. That's far enough. The man stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Up close, Ethan could see the coldness in his eyes, the cruelty in the set of his mouth. You Ethan Cole? The man asked. I am. And you're trespassing. Name's Wade. I work for Mr. Dalton Cree. We're looking for some missing property. Don't have any property here but my own. Wade smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. 6 children ran from the Bannock mine 5 days ago. Tracked them this direction before the storm hit. Only shelter for 10 miles is this ranch. So I'll ask you straight. You seen them? Ethan kept his face neutral. Lot of storms blow through. Lot of things get lost in them. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Now get off my land. Wade's smile vanished. Mr. Cree's offering a reward. $100 for information. $200 for return of the property. They're not property. They're children. They're contract labor, legally bound. You interfere with that, you're breaking the law. Funny thing about the law, Ethan said quietly. Sometimes it's legal and still wrong. Now I'll ask you once more, politely. Get off my land. Wade's hand drifted toward his gun. The man still mounted, younger, nervous-looking, shifted in his saddle. You're making a mistake, Wade said. Mr. Cree doesn't forget people who cross him. I'll take my chances. You're one man. Mr. Cree's got 20. Then he'll need all 20. Ethan raised the rifle slightly, just enough to make his point clear. Because I'm not moving, and you are. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Ethan could feel the weight of 6 lives pressing down on him. 6 children huddled in a bedroom upstairs, trusting him to keep them safe. Wade spat in the snow. You'll regret this. Probably, but I'll regret a lot of things less than I'd regret giving you those kids. Wade remounted. Before he turned his horse, he looked back at Ethan. Storm's over. Roads will be clear in a day or 2. Mr. Cree will come himself, and when he does, ain't nobody going to stop what happens to you. Let him come. Wade and his companion rode out, their horses plunging through the drifts. Ethan stood on the porch until they were out of sight, until the cold had seeped through his shirt and vest, and he couldn't feel his hands anymore. Then he went inside and found 6 children at the top of the stairs, Lena in front with her knife, all of them ready to fight or run. They're gone, Ethan said. For now, Lena said, but they'll be back. I know. You really gonna fight Mr. Cree? Even after what Wade said? Ethan looked at their faces, scared, hopeful, trying so hard to be brave. He thought about walking away, about sending them on to the Larsons, about saving his own skin. The thought lasted maybe half a second. Yes, he said, I'm really gonna fight. Thomas came down the stairs slowly, still moving like his ribs hurt. Then we fight with you. No, you're children. We're survivors. Thomas's voice was hard. We got out of the mine. We walked through a blizzard. We ain't helpless. I didn't say you were, but this is my fight. It's our fight, Lena said. We're the ones they want. We should get to stand against them. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to protect them from more violence, more fear. But looking at their faces, he understood. They'd already seen the worst. Hiding wouldn't change that. What they needed wasn't protection. It was the chance to stand up and be counted. All right, he said slowly. We fight together, but we do it smart. We prepare. We plan. We don't just wait for them to come kill us. What do we do? Ruth asked. Ethan thought about his ranch, isolated, defensible if you knew what you were doing. Thought about his weapons, his ammunition, his supplies. Thought about what Clara would say if she could see him now, preparing to turn their home into a fortress. She'd probably tell him he was crazy. Then she'd start helping. First, he said, we make this place secure. Board the windows, stock the cellar, make sure we can hold out if we have to. Second, I ride to town. Talk to the sheriff, see if there's any law left in this territory worth the name. Third, you teach us to shoot, Thomas interrupted. You're 12 years old. And I killed a man to save Ruth when she was being... Thomas's voice caught. When he was hurting her, shot him with his own gun. So don't tell me I'm too young. The casual revelation hung in the air like smoke. Ethan looked at Ruth, at the way she stood with her arms wrapped around herself, and felt rage burn hot in his chest. How old were you? He asked quietly. 7, Ruth whispered. 7 years old, the same age as Meg. Ethan closed his eyes, forced himself to breathe. When he opened them again, his voice was steady. All right, I'll teach you to shoot, but only for defense, only to protect yourselves. You understand? Yes, sir, Thomas said. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan showed them how to bar the doors, how to pile furniture for cover, how to load and fire the hunting rifles and the old shotgun Clara's father had given them as a wedding present. Thomas proved to be a natural shot, steady hands, good eye, patient. Lena was fierce and determined, but rushed her shots. Ruth wouldn't touch the guns at all, though she learned to reload faster than anyone. The younger children helped in other ways. Sam and Danny carried water from the well, filling every barrel and bucket in the house. Maddie and Jack counted ammunition, organized supplies, learned escape routes through the house. At night, they gathered in the front room, sleeping in shifts, someone always on watch. Ethan taught them signals. 1 knock for all clear, 2 for danger, 3 for immediate threat. They practiced until the youngest could do it in their sleep. On the 3rd day, Ethan rode to town. Red Creek was 12 miles south, a collection of rough buildings huddled around a crossroads like they were trying to stay warm. The main street was mud and snow, lined with a general store, a saloon, a hotel that was more boarding house than anything fancy, and the sheriff's office. Ethan tied Duke outside the sheriff's office and went in. The man behind the desk was maybe 50, thick around the middle, with a face that spoke of too much whiskey and not enough sleep. He looked up when Ethan entered, and something wary crossed his expression. Help you? I'm Ethan Cole. I ranch north of here. I know who you are. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. Heard you had some visitors few days back. News traveled fast. That's why I'm here. Those men were hunting children. I want to know what you're going to do about it. The sheriff sighed. Mr. Cole, those children are contract labor, legally owned. You harboring them is theft. They're not owned. They're enslaved. Law says different. Then the law's wrong. Maybe. The sheriff spread his hands. But it's still the law, and I'm still the sheriff. I can't just ignore legal contracts because you don't like them. Those children were beaten, starved, worked like animals. One of them is 8 years old. And I'm sorry for that, truly. But my hands are tied. Mr. Cree has papers. Judge Wilson signed off on every contract personal. Judge Wilson works for Cree. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Everyone in this town knows it. Cree owns the judge, owns you, owns anyone with power to stop him. The sheriff's face went red. Watch yourself, Cole. Or what? You'll arrest me? For telling the truth? Ethan leaned forward, hands on the desk. 6 children risked death to escape that mine. That should tell you something about what's happening up there. It tells me they broke their contracts and need to be returned. I won't let that happen. The sheriff stood, hand dropping to his gun. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. Those children are under my protection. Anyone tries to take them, they go through me. Then you'll die and they'll be taken anyway. Is that what you want? Ethan straightened. I want you to do your job. Investigate the mine. Look at how those children are treated. Stop hiding behind contracts and do what's right. What's right and what's legal ain't always the same thing. No, but a man still has to choose which one he'll serve. The sheriff sat back down, suddenly looking tired and old. Go home, Mr. Cole. Take those children and run. Get them far from here, somewhere Cree can't reach. That's the only way this ends without blood. I'm not running. Then you're a fool. Cree will come for them. And when he does, I won't stop him. Can't stop him, even if I wanted to. He met Ethan's eyes. I got a wife and daughter. I look the other way on things I shouldn't, because that's the price of keeping them safe. You think that makes me a coward? Fine. But I wake up every morning knowing my family's alive. Can you say different? Ethan stared at this broken man, at the compromise written in every line of his face, and felt something like pity. I had a wife and daughter, he said quietly. I lost them. So yeah, I can say different. I know exactly what it costs to lose the people you love. And I know I'd rather die fighting for something that matters than live knowing I stood by and let evil happen because it was easier. He turned and walked out before the sheriff could respond. Back on Duke, riding through the cold, Ethan let himself acknowledge the truth. He was alone in this. The law wouldn't help. The town wouldn't help. When Cree came, and he would come, it would be Ethan and 6 children against 20 men with guns and the law on their side. They were going to lose, probably going to die. But looking up at the mountains, at the white peaks sharp against the blue sky, Ethan found he didn't care. He'd spent 2 years in a fog of grief, going through the motions of living without really being alive. And now, preparing to fight a battle he couldn't win, he felt more awake than he had since Clara's death, because he had something worth dying for. 7 somethings, counting himself. A family built from snow and desperation, and the choice to stand when standing was the hardest thing in the world. He turned Duke toward home, toward the ranch and the children waiting there, and rode into the setting sun with his eyes wide open and his heart, for the first time in 2 years, fully alive. When Ethan rode back into the ranch yard that evening, the house was dark except for a single lamp burning in the front window, the signal they'd agreed on for all clear. He stabled Duke, rubbed him down proper, and walked to the house with the weight of what he'd learned sitting heavy on his shoulders. Lena met him at the door before he could knock, the rusted knife in her hand and her face tight with worry. You were gone too long. Had to ride slow, snow's still deep in places. He stepped inside, stamping his boots clean. Everyone all right? We're fine. Tommy's fever came back some, but Ruth got it down with cold cloths. Sam saw riders on the ridge this afternoon, but they didn't come close. She followed him to the kitchen, watching him with those old eyes. What'd the sheriff say? Ethan hung his coat on the peg by the door and moved to the stove where coffee sat warming. He poured himself a cup, buying time, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like the death sentence they were. He said the law's on Cree's side. Said the contracts are legal and I'm committing theft by keeping you here. He turned to face her. He told me to run. Take you all and get as far from here as possible. But you ain't going to do that. No. Why not? Thomas had appeared in the doorway. The other children clustered behind him. Makes sense. We could go to California or Oregon, somewhere Mr. Cree can't find us. He'd find you, Ethan said flatly. Man like that doesn't let his property walk away. He'd send bounty hunters, track you across the whole country if he had to. And I can't protect you on the road. Too exposed, too vulnerable. He set down his cup. Here, we have a chance. Small one, but a chance. We know the land. We can fortify. We can make them pay for every inch. You mean fight, Ruth said quietly. Yes. And die, Lena added. Ethan looked at each of their faces, scared but not surprised, like they'd known all along how this would end. Maybe, probably, but at least you'll die free. And if we're lucky, if we're smart, maybe some of you will make it out. Some of us. Thomas's voice was bitter. You mean the little ones. You'll make sure they escape while we hold Cree off. If it comes to that, yes. That ain't fair. No, but life isn't fair. You already know that better than most. The silence stretched. Then Maddie pushed past the older children and walked straight to Ethan. She was so small, barely came up to his belt. She looked up at him with those huge dark eyes. Will it hurt? She asked. Dying? The question punched the air from Ethan's lungs. He knelt down so he was eye level with her, this tiny child who'd seen too much already. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. But I promise you this. I won't let them take you back to that mine. Whatever happens, you won't go back there.
My mama said dying don't hurt if you ain't scared. Maddie's voice was matter of fact. She said, you just go to sleep, and when you wake up, everything's better. Your mama was right. Do you believe that? About waking up better? Ethan thought about Clara and Meg, about whether they were somewhere better now or just gone into darkness. He didn't know, didn't think anyone really did. But looking at Maddie's face, he knew what answer she needed. Yes, he said, I believe it. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to stand with the others. Lena was watching him with an unreadable expression. You're a good liar, Mr. Ethan. I'm a bad liar, but sometimes lies are kinder than truth. Truth is we're all going to die here. Maybe, but we're not dead yet, and while we're alive, we fight. He stood, addressing all of them. I need to know, are you with me all the way? Because if you want to run, if you want to try for the Larson Ranch, or head for the territories, I'll understand. I'll help you go, but if you stay, it's together. No one gets left behind. No one fights alone. They looked at each other, those children who'd survived mine shafts and beatings and a winter blizzard. Some silent communication passed between them. We stay, Thomas said. The others nodded. Even you? Ethan asked Maddie. Even me. Then we've got work to do. Come on. He led them to the cellar, down the narrow stairs into the cool darkness that smelled of earth and stored vegetables. In the back corner, covered with old canvas, was a trunk Ethan hadn't opened in 2 years. He pulled off the canvas and knelt by the trunk. The lock was rusted, but it still opened to his key. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were things he'd hoped never to use again. What is all this? Thomas asked, peering over his shoulder. My war. Ethan pulled out a gun belt, checked the revolver, a Colt Army, well-maintained despite the years. I was a Union soldier, sharpshooter, served under Colonel Morrison's command, fought through Tennessee and Georgia. He unwrapped another bundle, a rifle custom-built with a scope. After the war, I came west to forget, met Clara, built this ranch, tried to be a different man. You killed people, Lena said. Not a question. Yes, more than I can count, more than I want to remember. And you gonna kill again. For us. Ethan met her eyes. I'm gonna defend us. All of us. If that means killing, then yes. He pulled out the rest of the trunk's contents. Ammunition, powder, cleaning supplies. A knife with a blade that had seen hard use. The tools of a man who'd learned killing as a trade. Can you teach us? Thomas asked. Really teach us? Not just shooting, but everything. How to fight. How to survive. You already know how to survive. We know how to run and hide. That ain't the same as fighting back. Ethan looked at this 12-year-old boy with bruises still fading on his ribs and something hard and determined in his eyes. Looked at Lena with her rusted knife and her refusal to be a victim.
looked at all of them and saw not children, but soldiers in a war they'd been drafted into by circumstance and cruelty. "All right," he said, "I'll teach you everything I know. But you do exactly what I say, when I say it. No arguments, no hesitation. In a fight, hesitation kills. Understood?" "Yes, sir," they chorused. "Good. Then let's start." The next week passed in a strange rhythm of domestic routine and combat preparation. Mornings were for chores, feeding animals, hauling water, cooking, cleaning. Ethan made sure they ate well, building up strength they'd need. Afternoons were for training. He started with the basics. How to hold a rifle without the weight throwing off your balance. How to sight down the barrel, adjust for distance and wind. How to control your breathing so the shot went where you aimed instead of where fear sent it. Thomas took to it natural as breathing. His hands were steady, his patience endless. By the third day, he could hit a tin can at 50 yards 3 times out of 5. Lena struggled more. She rushed, pulled the trigger instead of squeezing, let anger make her sloppy. But she was determined, and determination counted for something. Ethan worked with her on controlling her breath, on finding calm in the chaos. Ruth refused to shoot, but learned everything else. How to load, how to clean, how to carry ammunition and powder, how to bandage wounds and set broken bones and keep someone alive when death was breathing down their neck. The younger children learned to run messages, to hide in spaces adults wouldn't think to look, to move quiet through the house and barn. Ethan built them bolt holes, places they could hide if the house was breached, made them practice until they could disappear in seconds. In the evenings, after the little ones were in bed, Ethan sat with Thomas and Lena and taught them the harder lessons. Where to shoot a man to stop him fast, how to use darkness and terrain as weapons, how to make someone think you were somewhere you weren't. "War ain't like the stories," he told them one night, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. "It ain't noble or glorious. It's ugly and it's dirty, and it's about doing whatever it takes to make sure you're the one still standing when it's over." "Is that what you did?" Lena asked. "Whatever it took?" "Yes." "You regret it?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Upstairs, one of the children was crying softly in their sleep. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret that the world's built in a way that makes good men do terrible things. But the things I did to survive, to protect the men in my unit, to end the war so we could all go home? No, I don't regret those." "Even the killing?" "Even that. Because the alternative was letting evil win, and I've seen what happens when good people stand aside and let evil have its way." He looked at them. "That's why I'm teaching you this. Not so you'll become killers, but so you'll survive. So when Cree comes, you'll have a fighting chance." "When do you think he'll come?" Thomas asked. "Soon. Week, maybe less. He'll want to make an example. Can't have his property escaping without consequence. Might give the others ideas." "The others," Lena repeated softly. "The ones still at the mine." "Yes. We should go back for them. After. If we survive." "One fight at a time," Ethan said. But he was thinking it too, thinking about 30 children still trapped in that mine, still suffering. Thinking about how far one man could push back against an empire built on cruelty. That night, lying awake in his chair while the children slept upstairs, Ethan let himself remember the war. Not the big battles, the famous fights, but the small moments, the men he'd served with, the choices he'd made, the line between soldier and murderer, and whether he'd crossed it. He'd killed his first man at 19. A Confederate soldier, barely older than Ethan, who'd had the bad luck to be standing guard when Ethan's unit came through. Ethan had put a bullet through his heart from 200 yards, watched him fall, and felt nothing but relief that the man hadn't raised an alarm. It was only later, seeing the photograph in the dead soldier's pocket, a young woman, a baby, that Ethan had understood what he'd done. Not killed an enemy, killed a man, a husband, a father. He'd thrown up in the bushes and then gone on to kill 11 more men before the week was out. That was war. You did what you had to, and you lived with it after. Looking at these children now, teaching them to kill, Ethan wondered if he was doing the right thing. Wondered if he was protecting them, or just teaching them to become what he'd been, hollow and haunted and good at dealing death. But when he thought about the alternative, about sending them out defenseless to face what was coming. He knew there was no other choice. Sometimes the right thing and the good thing weren't the same, and you just had to choose which weight you could carry. On the 8th day, Wade came back. Ethan saw him from the upstairs window, 3 riders this time, moving slow up the road. He recognized Wade's bulk even at a distance. "Lena," he called down, "get everyone in position." They moved like they'd practiced. The little ones into the cellar, hidden behind false shelving Ethan had built. Thomas to the upstairs window with the rifle. Ruth to the kitchen with medical supplies ready. Lena at the back door, escape route clear. Ethan met Wade in the yard, rifle across his chest, revolver on his hip. "Thought I told you to get off my land," he said. Wade reined in his horse 20 feet away. The 2 men with him spread out, flanking. One had a shotgun across his saddle. The other wore 2 pistols, tied down low like a gunfighter. "Mr. Cree wants his property back," Wade said. "Sent me to collect. And I told you before, they're not here." "That's a lie." Wade smiled, cold and mean. "We found tracks, small feet, leading right to your door." "Lots of tracks in snow. Could be anyone's." "Could be, but ain't." Wade leaned forward in his saddle. "Mr. Cree's a patient man, but his patience has limits. He's given you 8 days to see sense. Time's up. You hand over those children, you walk away from this. You don't. Things get ugly." "They're already ugly." "You got no idea how ugly they can get." Wade gestured to the house. "Nice place. Be a shame if it burned. Accidents happen, especially to men who don't know when to back down." Ethan felt rage coil in his chest, hot and familiar. The same rage that had carried him through 4 years of war. The same rage that made men dangerous. "You threaten my home again," he said quietly, "and you won't leave this yard alive." The gunfighter's hand drifted toward his pistol. Ethan didn't move, didn't even blink, but something in his stillness made the man pause. Wade saw it too. His eyes narrowed. "You're a soldier. I can smell it on you. Figure you saw action in the war." "I did." "So you know how to fight, how to kill, but you also know when you're outnumbered." Wade gestured to his men. "There's 3 of us now. Tomorrow there'll be 10. Next day, 20. However many it takes, you can't win this." "Don't have to win. Just have to make it cost you more than it's worth." 6 runaway children ain't worth dying for." "Maybe not to you," Ethan said, "but to me, they're worth everything." Wade studied him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "You're a fool. But I'll give you one more chance. One more day. Tomorrow at noon, you hand them over or we come take them, and we burn everything you got in the process." He turned his horse and rode out, his men following. Ethan stood in the yard until they were out of sight, until the sound of hoofbeats faded to nothing. Then he went inside and found the children waiting. "Tomorrow," Lena said. Not a question. "Tomorrow. We should run tonight, while we still can." "Where would you run to? They're watching the roads, watching the woods. They track you down in hours." "So we just wait here to die?" "No." Ethan moved to the table, spread out paper and pencil. "We prepare. We plan. We make sure that if they want this ranch, they pay for it in blood." He drew the layout of the property: house, barn, outbuildings, trees, fences, marked positions, lines of fire, escape routes. "They'll come at noon," he said. "Probably from the front, overwhelming force. Wade will want to make it quick and brutal, but we know this ground and they don't. That's our advantage." "What do we do?" Thomas asked. Ethan looked at him, at all of them, and felt the weight of what he was about to ask. Children. He was asking children to stand and fight, to kill or be killed. But they weren't children anymore. The mine had stolen that from them. All Ethan could do now was give them the tools to survive what childhood had already thrust upon them. "We give them hell," he said, "and we make them remember that freedom isn't free, that some things are worth dying for, that 6 children and 1 broken-down rancher can stand against an empire if they're willing to pay the price." He looked each of them in the eye. "Last chance. Anyone wants to run, wants to try for the Larsons, wants to take their chances in the wilderness, I understand. I'll help you go. No shame in choosing to live." No one moved. "All right then," Ethan said. "Let's get ready."
They worked through the night. Ethan showed Thomas and Lena the best firing positions, windows with clear sight lines, corners that provided cover, places where one person could hold off three. He positioned ammunition at each spot, water, rags for cleaning barrels between shots. He moved furniture to create barriers, piled up anything that would stop a bullet, filled buckets with water in case of fire, made sure every weapon was loaded and ready. Ruth prepared the cellar, stocking it with food and blankets, setting up a space where the youngest children could hide. She worked with grim efficiency, this 9-year-old girl who'd seen things no child should see. The younger ones did what they could. Sam and Danny checked all the doors and windows, made sure the bars were solid. Jack and Maddie organized supplies, counted bullets, prepared bandages. By dawn, they were as ready as they'd ever be. Ethan gathered them in the front room as the sun came up, painting the snow-covered mountains pink and gold. "This is it," he said. "In a few hours they'll come, and when they do, everything changes. There's no going back from this. Once shots are fired, once blood is spilled, we're committed." He paused. "But I want you to know, whatever happens today, I'm proud of you, proud of your courage, proud of how you've stood together, proud to stand with you." "Mr. Ethan?" Maddie said in her small voice. "Are you our family now?" The question hung in the air. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Yes," he said. "Yes, we're family. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that's stronger than blood ever was." Lena was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Thomas had his jaw clenched tight. Ruth was holding the younger children, her face set and determined. "Then let's protect our family," Thomas said. "Let's show them what happens when you come for what's ours." Ethan checked his rifle one final time, checked his revolver. Looked at the house Clara had loved, at the home they'd built together, at the life he'd thought was over, at the new life beginning in its place. "Positions," he said, "and wait for my signal. No one fires until I fire first, understood?" "Yes, sir." They scattered to their assigned places, Thomas upstairs with the scoped rifle, Lena at the side window with the shotgun, Ruth in the kitchen, ready to run to whoever needed ammunition or medical help. The younger children in the cellar with strict orders not to come out until either Ethan or Lena came to get them. Ethan took his position at the front window, rifle resting on the sill, and waited. The sun climbed higher, the mountains blazed white against blue sky. Somewhere a crow called, harsh and lonely. And then, at 2 minutes before noon, they came. Not 10 men, not 20, 30 riders spread across the road like an army, with Dalton Cree himself at the head, tall and hard-faced, dressed in black, a man who looked like he'd bought and paid for the whole territory and knew it. Ethan felt his heart kick against his ribs. This was it, the moment everything ended or began. He thought of Clara one last time, of Meg, of the life he'd lost and the life he'd found. Then he raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel, and waited for Dalton Cree to make his move. Dalton Cree sat his horse like a man who'd never been told no in his life. Even at a distance, Ethan could see the expensive cut of his coat, the silver trim on his saddle, the way the men around him stayed just slightly behind, not out of respect, but out of fear. This was a man who'd built an empire on the backs of the desperate and the powerless, who saw people as tools to be used and discarded. Cree raised one gloved hand. The rider stopped as one, a wall of men and horses and weapons spread across Ethan's property like a plague. "Ethan Cole," Cree's voice carried clear across the yard, cultured and cold. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ethan stayed at the window, rifle steady. "I have 6 children under my protection. They don't belong to anyone but themselves." "The law disagrees. I have contracts, signed and witnessed, binding those children to labor until their debts are paid." Cree urged his horse forward a few steps. "You're interfering with legal commerce. That makes you a criminal. And you're enslaving children. That makes you something worse." A ripple of movement went through Cree's men. Hands drifted toward weapons. But Cree held up his hand again, and they stilled. "I'm a businessman," Cree said. "I provide opportunities for those with nothing. Food, shelter, work. In exchange, they fulfill their obligations. It's a fair arrangement." "Fair," Ethan repeated. "Ethan, you beat a 12-year-old boy with a chain for working too slow. You murdered a woman in the street for trying to protect her daughter.
You work children 14 hours a day in mine shafts that kill grown men. That's not fair. That's evil. Cree's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I see they've been telling stories. Children lie, Mr. Cole, especially children trying to avoid their responsibilities. These children don't lie. They don't have to. The scars speak for themselves. Scars from their own carelessness. Mining is dangerous work. Accidents happen. And murders? Ethan's voice went hard. Are those accidents too? I've murdered no one. Everything I do is within the bounds of law. Cree leaned forward slightly. But I'm a reasonable man. I understand you formed an attachment to these children. So I'll make you an offer. Give them back peacefully, and I'll forgive the theft. You can walk away from this, go back to your quiet life. Forget this ever happened. And the children? Will be returned to the mine where they belong. They'll be disciplined, of course. Can't have them thinking escape has no consequences. But they'll live. Ethan thought about what that discipline would look like. Thought about Lena and Thomas and Ruth and the little ones, beaten and broken and thrust back into darkness. No, he said. No? Cree's voice carried genuine surprise, as if he'd never heard the word before. No, they stay here. They're free, and you're leaving my property. Cree was silent for a moment. Then he laughed, a sound without humor. Do you see how many men I brought, Mr. Cole? Do you understand what's about to happen if you continue this foolishness? I understand you brought an army to fight one man and 6 children. Must be real proud of yourself. The words hit their mark. Ethan saw Cree's jaw tighten, saw rage flicker across that controlled face. I brought enough men to ensure there's no doubt about the outcome, Cree said coldly, to make an example that will be remembered. You think you're protecting those children? You're signing their death warrants. When this is over, when you're dead and your house is ashes, I'll take them back. And what they suffer then will be on your conscience. I'll be dead. Won't have a conscience. Then it'll be on theirs. They'll know their freedom cost your life. They'll carry that weight forever. Is that what you want for them? Ethan felt the barb sink in because it was true. The children would carry this, would remember, would have to live with whatever happened here, but they'd live free, and that was worth the price. Better they carry the weight of my choice than the chains of yours, he said. Last warning, Cree. Turn around. Leave. Don't come back. Or what? You'll shoot me? Shoot all of us? Cree gestured to his men. You might get 1, maybe 2 before we cut you down. Is that how you want to die? Alone? For nothing? Not alone. Thomas's voice rang out from the upstairs window. And not for nothing. Cree's head snapped up. He saw Thomas at the window, rifle aimed, steady as stone. A child with a gun, Cree said. How touching. Put it down, boy, before you hurt yourself. I already killed a man, Thomas called back. Shot him dead for hurting Ruth. I'll kill you too if you don't leave. Movement from the side window. Lena, shotgun visible. There's more of us than you thought, she said. And we all know how to shoot. Maybe you got 30 men, but how many are you willing to lose? 5? 10? 15? Cree's expression had gone flat, calculating. His eyes swept the house, counting positions, measuring odds. You've trained them, he said to Ethan. Turn children into soldiers. You're as bad as I am. No, I gave them a choice. You never did. Choice, Cree spat the word. You think the world runs on choices? It runs on power, on money, on men with the will to take what they want and the strength to keep it. Those children are mine because I have the power to make them mine. You're about to die because you don't have the power to stop me. Maybe, but I have something you don't. And what's that? Something worth dying for. For a moment, silence held. The wind had died. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Then Cree lowered his hand and said one word. Take them. The yard exploded into chaos. Ethan fired first, his bullet taking down the man on Cree's right, before the man even cleared his holster. The crack of the rifle was still echoing when Thomas fired from upstairs, dropping another rider from his saddle. Lena's shotgun boomed, buckshot tearing into a horse's chest and sending it screaming to the ground, its rider trapped beneath. Cree's men scattered, diving for cover, returning fire. Bullets punched through the walls, shattered windows, sent splinters flying. Ethan ducked low, worked the bolt on his rifle, came up firing. Another man down. The house shook with the thunder of guns. Smoke filled the air, acrid and choking. Men were shouting, horses screaming, someone crying out in pain. Ethan moved from window to window, firing and moving, never staying in one place. That was the key. Keep them guessing, make them waste ammunition on empty positions. He'd learned that in the war, learned how one man with the right tactics could hold off a dozen. Thomas was doing the same upstairs, firing from different windows, making Cree's men think there were more defenders than there were. The boy had good instincts, good control. Every shot he took had purpose. Lena was pure fury, the shotgun roaring every time someone got close to the house. She didn't have Thomas's precision, but she had his courage, standing in the window while bullets whined past her head, refusing to give ground. But there were too many. Even as Ethan dropped another man, 3 more were advancing on the barn, using it for cover. 2 were circling to the back of the house. 1 had made it to the porch and was trying to force the door. Ethan put a bullet through the door, heard a scream, heard the man stumble away. But more were coming, a tide of them, overwhelming through sheer numbers. A bullet caught the window frame inches from Ethan's head, showering him with splinters. He rolled away, came up in a new position, fired blind through the wall. Heard someone curse, hoped he'd hit. "Mr. Ethan!" Ruth's voice, high and scared. "They're at the back door!" Ethan ran through the house, his rifle hot in his hands. The back door was shaking, someone throwing their weight against it. The bar was holding, but barely. He leveled his rifle and fired through the door. 3 shots, low and center. The pounding stopped. Something heavy fell. But the front door exploded inward, the bar splintering under a battering ram made from a fence post. 2 men rushed in and Ethan fired from the hip, gut-shot the first one, missed the second. The man raised his pistol and Ethan threw himself sideways, felt the bullet pass so close it burned his cheek. Then Lena was there, the shotgun in her hands, too big for her, but she held it steady and fired both barrels at point-blank range. The man went down hard and didn't move. Ethan grabbed her shoulder. "Upstairs. Now. Help Thomas." "But now." She ran. Ethan reloaded, stepped over the dead man, looked out the shattered front door. The yard was a battlefield, bodies down, horses running loose, men taking cover behind anything they could find. And still they kept coming. Ethan saw Wade, the big man moving toward the house with a rifle. Saw him raise it, sight in on the upstairs window where Thomas was firing. Ethan didn't think. He stepped into the doorway, raised his rifle, and fired. The bullet took Wade in the chest. The big man looked down at the spreading red stain, looked up at Ethan with something like surprise, and fell. But the moment of exposure cost Ethan. A bullet clipped his left arm, spinning him around. Pain exploded through his shoulder. He stumbled back into the house, his left arm suddenly useless. Ruth was there, face pale but determined. "Let me see." "Not now." "Let me see." She pushed him into a chair, ripped his sleeve open. The bullet had torn through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone but leaving a hell of a wound. Blood soaked his shirt, dripped onto the floor. Ruth worked fast, packing the wound with cloth, wrapping it tight. Her hands were steady even though Ethan could see her shaking. "You're going to be okay," she said. It sounded like she was trying to convince herself. "I know. You did good, Ruth. Real good." An explosion rocked the house. The windows on the south side shattered inward, glass spraying everywhere. They were using dynamite now, trying to bring the whole house down. Ethan struggled to his feet. His left arm was fire, but he could still hold a rifle right-handed. He moved back to the window, looked out, and felt his heart sink. Cree's men were everywhere, a coordinated assault now instead of the disorganized rush. They'd learned the hard way that charging the house meant death, so they were being smart, using cover, advancing in pairs, laying down suppressing fire while others moved. Professional. These weren't just mine guards and hired thugs. Some of them were soldiers, real soldiers who knew what they were doing. And Ethan was down to 1 good arm with 2 children and 4 rifles against what looked like 20 men still standing. The math was simple and brutal. They were going to lose. Another explosion, this one at the barn. Flames leaped up, hungry and bright. They were burning him out, destroying everything, making sure there was nothing left. Ethan thought about the little ones in the cellar, about Maddie and Sam and Danny and Jack, thought about how long they'd last if the house came down on top of them. "Lena," he called up the stairs, "get everyone to the cellar, now! We can still fight! It's over, get them to safety!" He heard running footsteps overhead, heard Lena and Thomas arguing, heard them finally moving toward the back stairs that led down to the kitchen. Ethan stayed at the window, firing when he had a target, forcing Cree's men to keep their distance, buying time for the children to get below. A bullet smashed through the window next to him. Another punched through the wall. They were closing in, the circle tightening. He fired his last round, reached for more ammunition, and found he was out. The pouch at his belt was empty. The boxes they'd stocked around the house were all upstairs or in rooms now filled with smoke and fire. Ethan drew his revolver. 6 shots left, 6 bullets between the children and whatever came through that door. He heard bootsteps on the porch, heard men moving into position. They were going to rush the house all at once, overwhelmed through sheer force. This was it. The end. Ethan thought about Clara, about seeing her again if there was anything after this. Thought about Meg, about the family he'd lost and the family he'd found, and how strange it was that both had led him to this moment, standing in a burning house with a gun in his hand and children depending on him to hold the line. He wasn't afraid. That surprised him. He'd thought he would be at the end, but all he felt was a kind of clarity, a sense of purpose so strong it burned brighter than the fear. The door started to open. Ethan raised his revolver, and then he heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast, a lot of them. The door stopped opening. Someone outside shouted. The gunfire that had been building to a crescendo suddenly faltered, confused. Ethan risked a look out the window. Coming up the road from the south, riding hard, were maybe 15 riders. At their head was a man Ethan recognized, Samuel Larson, his neighbor from 6 miles down the valley. Behind him were other ranchers, men Ethan knew by sight, if not by name. Hard men, frontier men, the kind who carved lives out of wilderness and didn't take kindly to empires built on suffering. And riding with them, wearing a deputy's badge that caught the sunlight, was a young man Ethan had never seen before. He was maybe 25, tall and lean, with a kind of face that looked like it didn't smile much. But his eyes were sharp and clear, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. "This is Deputy Marshal James Hendricks, United States Federal Court," he called out. "Every man here is to lower his weapons immediately and submit to arrest." Cree wheeled his horse around. "On what charge?" "These are my men, on my business, recovering my property." "On charges of human trafficking, child endangerment, murder, attempted murder, and corruption of territorial officials." Hendricks pulled a document from his coat. "I have federal warrants for the arrest of Dalton Cree and his known associates. I also have documentation of witness testimony from children who escaped the Bannock mine, testimony taken in Denver 2 days ago." Ethan's mind reeled. Denver. 2 days ago. That meant Charlie, he breathed. The boy they'd left behind, the 8-year-old with the broken leg. Someone had found him, someone had listened to him, and brought the law that actually mattered. Cree's face had gone white. "Those warrants are worthless. Judge Wilson has been arrested on federal corruption charges," Hendricks cut in, "as has Sheriff Morton. This is a federal matter now, Mr. Cree. Territorial law doesn't apply. You can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to surrender peacefully or be shot down where you sit. Choose now." For a long moment, Cree stared at the deputy marshal. Then he looked around at his men, at the bodies on the ground, at the burning barn and the house full of bullet holes. At the cost of his empire, written in blood and fire. His shoulders sagged. He dropped his reins. "I surrender." "Smart choice." Hendricks gestured to the ranchers. "Disarm them. All of them. Anyone resists, shoot them." The ranchers moved in, professional and efficient. Cree's men, seeing how the wind was blowing, didn't resist. Within minutes, they were disarmed and lined up in the yard, hands bound. Hendricks rode up to the house. "Ethan Cole?" Ethan stepped onto the porch, revolver still in his hand, blood soaking his shirt. "That's me." "The children? They all right?" "In the cellar, safe." "Good. Keep them there until we get this sorted." Hendricks looked at the house, at the damage, at the bodies. Hell of a fight you put up. Had to. I know. Charlie told us everything. Smart kid. Flagged down a patrol 2 days after you left him. Led them right to a cave full of documentation Cree's bookkeeper had hidden. Names, dates, payments, bodies. Everything we needed to build a case that would hold up in federal court. Ethan felt his knees go weak. They'd survived. Not just the fight. All of it. The children were safe. Cree was finished. Charlie, he said hoarsely, is he alive? Legs healing. He's in Denver with a family that's looking after him until this is settled. Hendricks dismounted, climbed the porch steps. You did good, Mr. Cole. Damned good. Most men would have turned those children over or run. You stood. Didn't have a choice. You did. And you made the right one. Hendricks looked past Ethan into the house. Let's get those kids up here. They need to see this. Need to know it's really over. Ethan called down to the cellar, heard movement, hesitant footsteps. Then Lena appeared, shotgun still in her hands, face streaked with powder smoke and tears. It's safe, Ethan said gently. Come on up. All of you. They came slowly, blinking in the light, not quite believing. Thomas with his rifle. Ruth with her medical supplies. The little ones, wide-eyed and silent. They stood on the porch and looked out at Dalton Cree, bound and beaten, his empire in ruins around him. Is it true? Lena whispered. Is he really arrested? Federal charges, Hendricks confirmed. He'll hang for what he's done. Him and everyone who helped him. Lena started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Thomas put an arm around her shoulders. Ruth was crying too, silent tears streaming down her face. The little ones just stared, too young to fully understand, but old enough to know something fundamental had changed. Samuel Larson rode up, dismounted. He was a big man with kind eyes and a weathered face. Ethan, we came soon as we heard. Wish we'd gotten here sooner. You got here when it mattered. Ethan shook his hand with his good arm. How'd you know to come? Charlie. After the marshals got his testimony, they sent word to every ranch within 50 miles. Asked if anyone knew you, knew where you lived. I came running, brought everyone I could. He looked at the children. These the ones you've been protecting? These are them. Then they're welcome in my home, yours, anyone's who'll take them. Whole Valley's been talking about what you did, about how you stood up to Cree when no one else would. Larson's voice was rough with emotion. You made us all ashamed, Ethan. Ashamed we didn't stand sooner, but we're standing now. Other ranchers were coming forward, offering help, offering homes, offering solidarity. These were hard men, frontier men, but Ethan saw tears in more than one set of eyes. Hendricks was organizing his prisoners, preparing them for transport. He came back to the porch one last time. Mr. Cole, I'll need formal statements from you and the children, for the trial. Can you bring them to Red Creek in a few days? We'll have federal judges there by week's end. We'll be there. Good. Hendricks hesitated. What you did here? It matters. More than you know. Charlie's testimony exposed Cree's whole operation. We've already freed 32 children from the mine, found mass graves, evidence of decades of abuse. This is going to bring down everyone involved, all the way to the territorial governor. 32 children. Free because 6 had been brave enough to run, because one man had been stubborn enough to stand. The children, Ethan said, the ones from the mine. Where will they go? Orphanages, mostly. Some have family we can track down. Others, Hendricks shrugged. We'll do our best for them. Ethan looked at the 6 children beside him, at Lena and Thomas and Ruth and the little ones, at his family, forged in fire and desperation. They can stay here, he heard himself say. All of them. Any child who needs a home. This ranch is big enough. Land's good enough. We'll make it work. Lena looked at him with shining eyes. You mean it? I mean it. You're my family now. All of you. And family takes care of family. The children rushed him then, all 6 of them, wrapping their arms around him, careful of his wounded shoulder, crying and laughing and whole. Ethan held them as best he could with one good arm and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen since Claire and Meg died. Felt warmth flood in where there'd been only cold.
Felt like maybe, just maybe, he could live again. The sun was setting when Cree and his men were finally loaded into wagons for transport. Ethan stood on his porch, surrounded by children and neighbors, and watched his enemy taken away. Cree looked back once, his face twisted with hate and defeat. Ethan met his eyes and felt nothing but pity. This man who'd built everything on cruelty, who'd thought power and money could protect him from justice, was learning what Ethan already knew. That in the end, what mattered wasn't what you took. It was what you gave, what you fought for, what you were willing to die to protect. And Dalton Cree had nothing worth dying for, while Ethan had everything. The neighbors stayed until dark, helping clear the bodies, putting out the last of the barn fire, boarding up the worst of the bullet holes. Samuel Larson's wife brought food, real food, hot and plentiful, and the children ate like they were afraid it might disappear if they looked away. Ethan sat at his scarred kitchen table with his arm in a sling Ruth had fashioned, watching them eat, and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. When the last of the neighbors finally rode out, promising to return in the morning with lumber and nails and willing hands, Ethan found himself alone with the children in a house that looked like a battlefield, but felt, somehow, like home. "We should clean up," Lena said, looking at the blood on the floor, the shattered glass, the splintered furniture. "Tomorrow," Ethan said. "Tonight we just breathe." They gathered in the front room, the only space not completely destroyed. Someone had salvaged the sofa, pushed it back against the wall. The children piled onto it and onto the floor around Ethan's chair, close enough to touch, needing the comfort of proximity after coming so close to losing everything. "Mr. Ethan," Maddie said quietly, "is it really over? Is Mr. Cree really gone?" "He's really gone. He'll stand trial in federal court, and then he'll hang for what he did. What about the others? The children still at the mine?" "They're free. All of them. Deputy Marshal said they freed 32 children. They're safe now." "And Charlie?" Sam's voice was small, hopeful. "He's really alive." "He's alive. His leg is healing. The marshal said he's with a good family in Denver." Sam started crying again, silent tears of relief. Danny pulled his brother close. Thomas was staring at his hands, at the calluses and scars that marked a childhood spent in darkness. What happens now, to us? Ethan had been thinking about that all afternoon, about what it meant to suddenly have 6 children depending on him, about responsibility and commitment, and whether a broken man who'd spent 2 years wishing for death had any business raising children. But looking at their faces, at the trust in their eyes despite everything they'd survived, he knew the answer. "You stay here," he said. "All of you, this is your home now." "Forever?" Maddie asked. "Forever." "But we ain't your real children," Lena said carefully. "We ain't blood." "No, but your family, and that's better than blood. That's choice." Ethan leaned forward, wincing as his shoulder protested. "I choose you, all of you, if you'll have me." The children looked at each other, that silent communication that spoke of months surviving together, depending on each other, becoming something more than 6 separate souls. "We choose you too," Thomas said. The others nodded. Then it settled. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "We're a family, strange as hell, built from a blizzard and a battle, but a family." "What do we call you?" Ruth asked. "Mr. Ethan seems too formal now." Ethan thought about that. Thought about the word father and whether he'd earned the right to hear it again. Thought about Meg, about whether taking that name from these children would be honoring her memory or betraying it. "Call me whatever feels right," he said finally. "Mr. Ethan is fine. Ethan is fine. If someday you want to call me something else, that's fine too. We'll figure it out as we go." "Like a real family," Jack said. "Exactly like a real family." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day finally settling on them. Ethan could see exhaustion pulling at the children, see them fighting sleep because sleep meant vulnerability and old habits died hard. "You're safe now," he said gently. "You can sleep. I'll keep watch." "Your arm," Lena protested. "You need rest too." "I'll rest when I know you're all settled. Go on. Upstairs, real beds, remember?" They went reluctantly, climbing the stairs in a group, still not quite willing to separate.
Ethan heard them moving around overhead, heard water running as they washed, heard quiet voices as they settled into the rooms he'd prepared. When silence finally fell, he allowed himself to lean back in the chair and close his eyes. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. His whole body ached. He was too old for gunfights and too tired for heroics. But he'd do it again in a heartbeat. Footsteps on the stairs. Ethan opened his eyes to find Lena standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of Clara's old quilts. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Keep thinking they're going to come back, that it's not really over." She came and sat on the floor beside his chair. "Feels too good to be true." "I know, but it's true. Cree's finished. The mine's shut down. The children are free. Because of you. Because of Charlie. Because he was brave enough to flag down that patrol. Because he had documentation Cree's bookkeeper hid. Because sometimes the good guys actually win." Lena was quiet for a moment, then, "My mama would have liked you. She was fierce like you. Stood up to people even when it was dangerous." Her voice broke. "That's why they killed her." Ethan reached down with his good hand, rested it on her shoulder. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman. You're a lot like her, you know. That same fierceness, that same courage. I'm scared all the time, though." "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You walked through a blizzard to save 5 other children. You held a knife on a grown man to protect them. You stood in a gunfight when most adults would have run. If that's not brave, I don't know what is. I just didn't want them to go back. Didn't want them to hurt anymore. And they won't. Not if I have anything to say about it." Ethan paused. "Lena, when we go to Red Creek for the trial, you're going to have to testify. Tell the judges what happened at the mine, what Cree did, what you saw." She tensed. "I know. It won't be easy. They'll ask hard questions. Make you remember things you'd probably rather forget. I remember anyway, every day, every night. Don't matter if I talk about it or not, it's still there. Then talking about it might help. Might help put it behind you." "You think talking helps?" She looked up at him with those old, knowing eyes. "You talked about losing your wife and daughter, about the war, about all the things that hurt." Ethan was quiet. "No, I buried it. Let it eat me alive for 2 years. Did that help?" "No, it made everything worse." He met her gaze. "Which is why I'm telling you, don't do what I did. Don't let the hurt turn into poison. Talk about it. Cry about it. Get angry about it. Whatever you need to do to get it out instead of letting it fester. Even if it makes me weak?" "It won't make you weak. It'll make you whole." He touched her hair, matted and tangled still despite Ruth's attempts to comb it. "You don't have to be strong all the time anymore, Lena. You've got family now. You can share the weight." She leaned against his chair, and he felt her shoulders shake with silent sobs. He let her cry, kept his hand on her hair, and said nothing because sometimes silence was the kindest thing you could offer. When she finally quieted, she wiped her face on the quilt and looked up at him. "I'm glad the blizzard brought us to you. I'm glad you didn't right away." "Me too." "You think—" She hesitated. "You think someday I could call you Papa, like Maddie wants to?" Ethan felt his throat close up. "I'd be honored." She nodded, satisfied, and curled up on the floor beside his chair. Within minutes, she was asleep, breathing deep and even. Ethan sat watch through the night, listening to the house settle, to the children breathing in their rooms upstairs, to the wind in the pines outside. His shoulder hurt and his body ached, and he was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. But he'd never felt more alive. The trial was held in Red Creek 3 weeks later, in a makeshift courtroom set up in the town hall. 2 federal judges had ridden in from Denver with Deputy Marshal Hendricks, bringing the weight of real law to a territory that had forgotten what justice looked like. The courtroom was packed. Ranchers, miners, townspeople, everyone who'd lived under Cree's shadow and never had the courage to speak against him. Now they filled the benches, hungry to see him finally answer for his crimes. Ethan sat in the front row with the children, all of them scrubbed clean and dressed in new clothes the church ladies had donated. They looked small and scared, these children who'd survived so much, facing the prospect of standing before strangers and reliving their trauma. "You don't have to do this," Ethan told them quietly. "Any of you. There's enough evidence without your testimony. You can wait outside." "No." Thomas's jaw was set. "We need to do this. Need to make sure everyone knows what he did." The others nodded agreement. When Lena was called to the stand, she walked up with her head high, her hands steady. She looked so small in the witness chair, so young, but when she spoke, her voice carried through the courtroom clear and strong. She told them everything, about her mother's murder, about being taken to the mine at 5 years old, about the conditions, the beatings, the children who'd died and been buried in unmarked graves, about the escape, the blizzard, finding Ethan. The courtroom was silent, horrified. More than one person was crying. Cree's lawyer, a slick man from back east who'd arrived talking about contracts and legal obligations, tried to shake her testimony, tried to make her seem unreliable, a child who didn't understand what she'd seen. "Isn't it true," he said smoothly, "that children often exaggerate? That what seems harsh to a child might simply be normal discipline?" Lena looked at him with contempt. "You ever been beaten with a chain for working too slow? You ever watched a 6-year-old die of lung fever because the mine owner wouldn't pay for a doctor? You ever seen a man put his hands on a 7-year-old girl in ways no man should touch a child?" The lawyer's face went pale. That ain't exaggeration," Lena said coldly. "That's truth. And if you can't tell the difference, you're as bad as he is." The judges didn't even bother to reprimand her. One of them was wiping his eyes. Thomas testified next, his voice flat and emotionless as he described the beatings, the starvation rations, the children who died in cave-ins that were ruled accidents. He showed the judges his scars, lifted his shirt to reveal the marks of the chain across his ribs. Ruth testified about the man who'd hurt her, about how Thomas had saved her, about living every day in fear of which guard would choose which child for which horror. Even Maddie took the stand, so small her feet didn't touch the floor. She told them about not remembering any life before the mine, about thinking darkness and hunger and fear were just how the world was. By the time the children finished testifying, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. And Cree, sitting at the defendant's table in his expensive suit, looked like what he was, a monster finally dragged into the light. The trial lasted 3 days. Witness after witness came forward. Former mine employees who'd quit in disgust, a doctor who'd been threatened into silence, even Cree's own bookkeeper who'd kept meticulous records of every crime in hopes of someday seeing justice. Charlie testified via written deposition from Denver, his words read aloud by the court clerk. He described the escape, the days hiding in the cave, the patrol he'd flagged down, the evidence he'd given them. When the prosecution rested, Cree's lawyer made one last attempt at defense. He talked about contracts, about legal obligations, about how his client was simply running a business within the bounds of territorial law. The head judge cut him off mid-sentence. "Counselor," he said, his voice hard as iron, "I have presided over many trials in my career. I have seen men defend the indefensible, excuse the inexcusable, and dress evil in the language of law, but rarely have I seen evil as naked and undeniable as this." He looked at Cree. "Your client enslaved children, beat them, starved them, murdered them. No contract, no territorial law, no amount of legal sophistry can change those facts. This court finds Dalton Cree guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge banged his gavel for order, but he was smiling. Sentencing was immediate. Death by hanging for the murders, life imprisonment for the trafficking and abuse, to be carried out within the month. Cree finally spoke, his voice shaking with rage. "This is a travesty. I have rights." You have nothing," the judge interrupted. "No rights, no power, no empire. You are a criminal and a monster, and the only mercy this court will show you is a quick death instead of the slow one you deserve." Marshal Hendricks took Cree into custody. As they led him from the courtroom, he looked at Ethan and the children one last time. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I have friends. Money. They'll come for you. They won't." Hendricks yanked him forward. "Your friends are being arrested even as we speak. Your money's been seized to compensate your victims. It's over, Cree. You lost." And then he was gone, dragged away to a cell to await the rope.
The children gathered around Ethan, and he pulled them close with his good arm. The shoulder was healing, but still tender. "It's really over," Thomas said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "It's really over. What happens now?" Ethan looked at their faces, at the hope beginning to replace the fear, and made a decision he'd been considering for weeks. "Now we go home, and we build something new." The ranch house took 2 months to repair. The whole valley pitched in, ranchers bringing lumber, their wives bringing food, their children helping haul and hammer and paint. What had been a lonely outpost became the center of a community, a symbol of what could happen when people stood together against evil. The barn was rebuilt bigger than before. The bullet holes were patched. The blood-stained floors were scrubbed clean and refinished. But some changes were permanent. The back bedroom that had been Meg's was now Lena and Ruth's room, painted yellow again, full of life and laughter. The spare room held Thomas and the younger boys. Bunk beds Ethan built himself lining the walls. Maddie slept in a small room off the kitchen, close to the warmth of the stove, close to where Ethan could hear her if she had nightmares. And the children from the mine started arriving in ones and twos and small groups. Some had family who came to claim them, but many had nowhere to go, no one to take them. Ethan took them all. By summer's end, there were 14 children living at the ranch. 14 souls who'd survived hell and found something better on the other side. It was chaos, constant noise, constant motion, constant demands for attention and food and resolution of disputes. The house that had been silent for 2 years was now never quiet. Ethan had never been happier. Samuel Larson and his wife helped, teaching Ethan the things he'd forgotten about raising children. The church ladies came weekly with donated clothes and patient instruction. The school teacher from Red Creek rode out twice a week to teach the older children reading and arithmetic. Slowly, the children began to heal. The youngest ones, who'd known nothing but the mine, forgot faster. They learned to play, to laugh without looking over their shoulders, to be children. The older ones took longer. Thomas still woke screaming sometimes, trapped in dreams of darkness and chains. Ruth flinched at sudden movements. Lena slept with her knife under her pillow for months before she finally felt safe enough to put it away. But they all healed. Day by day, week by week, the shadows lifted. One evening in late August, Ethan stood on his porch watching the children play in the yard. They'd organized some kind of game involving a ball and complicated rules he didn't pretend to understand. Their laughter carried on the warm air, bright and free. Lena came to stand beside him, tall enough now that she came almost to his shoulder. She'd filled out over the summer, put on weight, started looking less like a starved bird and more like a healthy 12-year-old girl. "You did good, Papa," she said. She'd started calling him that in May, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The other children had followed her lead. Now he was Papa to all of them, and Ethan Cole, who'd thought his days of being a father were over, had 14 children who depended on him. "We did good," he corrected, "all of us together." "You think Mama can see this? Wherever she is? You think she knows I'm okay?" Ethan thought about Clara, about Meg, about whether the dead could see the living. "I think so. And I think she's proud of you, proud of how you survived, proud of how you're helping the little ones learn to survive too. I miss her. Still. Every day. That never goes away. But it gets easier to carry. Like you and your Clara and Meg? Yeah, like that." He put his arm around her shoulders. "They'd have liked you, you know. Clara would have loved your fierceness. Meg would have wanted you for a big sister. I would have liked that. Having a real sister instead of just these knuckleheads." But she was smiling, watching the children play. Thomas came running up, breathless and grinning. "Papa, can we ride to the creek tomorrow? It's hot enough for swimming. If you get your chores done first." "We will. I'll make sure everyone helps." He ran back to the game, already organizing, already leading. That boy was going to be something special, Ethan thought. They all were. Given a chance, given safety and food and someone who believed in them, these children who'd survived the worst humanity had to offer were going to do amazing things. As the sun set, painting the mountains gold and rose, the children came inside for supper. It took 3 tables to seat everyone now. Ethan had built extra to accommodate his growing family. The noise was tremendous, everyone talking at once, arguing over who sat where, comparing their day's adventures. Ethan looked around the table at their faces, clean, healthy, alive.
and felt gratitude so strong it was almost painful. After supper, after the dishes were washed and the little ones put to bed, Ethan sat on the porch with the older children. This had become their ritual, these quiet evenings talking about the day, making plans for tomorrow, just being together. "Papa," Ruth said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you ever regret it? Taking us in? All of us? Your life would be easier if—" "No." Ethan cut her off gently but firmly. "Not for 1 second. Not even on the hardest days. You all gave me back my life. Before the blizzard, I was just going through the motions, waiting to die. Now I wake up every morning with purpose, with family, with love." He looked at each of them. "You didn't just survive the mine. You survived losing parents, losing homes, losing everything. And you came out the other side still able to trust, still able to love, still able to hope." "That's extraordinary. All of you are extraordinary." "We learned it from you," Thomas said. "No. You had it already. I just gave you a safe place to remember it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dark. "Papa?" Maddie's voice drifted from inside. "I had a bad dream." "Coming, sweetheart." Ethan stood, his shoulder protesting only slightly now. The wound had healed well, though it still ached when rain was coming. He found Maddie sitting up in bed, her rag doll clutched tight. She'd had that doll since the mine, one of the few things she'd carried out with her. It was worn and patched, but precious. "Tell me about the dream," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I was back there, in the dark, and I couldn't find anyone. I was all alone." "But you're not alone. Not anymore. You're here. You're safe. You've got 13 brothers and sisters and one stubborn old man who's never letting you go." She smiled a little at that. "Promise?" "Promise." "Cross my heart." He tucked her back in, smoothed her hair. "Want me to sit with you until you fall asleep?" "Yes, please." So he sat, holding her small hand, humming the lullaby Clara used to sing to Meg. When Maddie's breathing evened out into sleep, he stayed a while longer just to be sure. This, he thought, this was what mattered. Not the gunfight or the trial or the glory of standing against evil. This, sitting with a frightened child until she felt safe enough to sleep, giving her a place where nightmares could be soothed, and morning always came. Over the next year, the ranch became something more than just a home. It became a refuge. Word spread about the man who'd stood against Dalton Cree, about the ranch that took in children no one else wanted. More arrived, orphans, runaways, children escaping situations almost as bad as the mine. Ethan couldn't take them all, didn't have room, didn't have resources. But he took as many as he could, and he helped the others find good homes with families who'd been inspired by his example. The territory changed too. New laws were passed, outlawing child labor in the mines. Cree's execution was public and well-attended, a message that justice could still reach even the most powerful. The corrupt judge and sheriff were imprisoned. New officials were elected, honest men who remembered what the law was supposed to protect. It wasn't perfect. There was still suffering, still injustice. But it was better, and better was worth fighting for. On a warm day in June, a year and a half after the blizzard, Ethan stood in the church in Red Creek and watched his children, all 23 of them now, fill the pews. Some were his officially, papers signed and sealed. Others were temporary, staying until they found permanent homes. But they were all his in the ways that mattered. The occasion was Charlie's arrival. The boy had finally healed enough to leave Denver, and his temporary family had brought him to Red Creek to be reunited with the children he'd saved by his testimony. The reunion was tearful and joyful. Sam hugged his brother so tight Ethan worried he'd crack ribs. The other children clustered around, touching Charlie like they couldn't believe he was real, telling him everything he'd missed. Charlie's temporary family was there too, a doctor and his wife from Denver who'd cared for him while his leg healed. They'd grown attached to the boy, and he to them. "We'd like to adopt him," the doctor told Ethan quietly. "If that's all right. Give him a permanent home, a good education, opportunities." Ethan looked at Charlie, at the hope in the boy's face, at the love clear in his temporary family's eyes. "That's up to Charlie," he said, "but I think it's a fine idea." Charlie chose to go to Denver, to have a family of his own, to build a life free from the shadows. But he promised to visit, to write, to never forget where he came from or the family that had survived together. As the families gathered for a meal after the reunion, Ethan found himself standing a little apart, watching. His children, he thought of them all as his now, were laughing, eating, arguing, being exactly what children should be. Lena came to stand beside him. She was nearly 13 now, growing into the young woman she'd someday become. The rusted knife was long gone, replaced by confidence and strength that didn't need weapons. "You okay, Papa?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange life is. How a blizzard and 6 starving children could give me back everything I thought I'd lost." He looked at her. "About how the worst day of your life, the day you ran from the mine, became the best day of mine." "It became the best day of mine, too. The day everything changed." She slipped her hand into his. "The day we found home. The day we became family." They stood together watching the celebration, watching children who'd known only darkness learn to live in the light. Ethan thought about Clara, about Meg, about the family he'd lost. He thought they'd understand, thought they'd approve, thought maybe, in saving these children, he'd saved himself. The sun was setting when the families finally began to disperse, heading home to their ranches and lives. Ethan loaded his children into the 2 wagons he'd needed to transport them all, counted heads to make sure he hadn't lost anyone, and started the drive home. The children sang on the way back, old songs and new ones, silly rhymes and nonsense. Their voices carried on the evening air, joyful and free. When they reached the ranch and piled out of the wagons, racing each other to the house, fighting over who got to help with supper, arguing about chores and privileges and all the normal things children argued about, Ethan stood in the yard and just watched them. Thomas organizing the older children, Lena herding the younger ones toward the house, Ruth making sure everyone washed up, the little ones tumbling around like puppies, full of energy and life. His family, built from snow and desperation, from courage and choice, from love that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with commitment. He'd lost everything once, his wife, his daughter, his will to live. And he'd found everything again in 6 starving children holding a rusted knife. As he followed them into the house, his house, their house, the home they'd built together, Ethan Cole thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago. Hollow, broken, waiting for death. That man was gone. In his place was a father to 23, a rancher running a refuge, a man who'd learned that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. That sometimes losing everything makes room for something better. That sometimes the end is really just the beginning. That night, after the children were in bed and the house had finally quieted, Ethan sat on his porch under a sky full of stars. The mountains stood dark against the horizon, the same mountains where he'd found 6 children in a barn during a blizzard, the same mountains where he'd found himself. Somewhere in the house, a child laughed in their sleep. Somewhere, another was breathing easy without nightmares for the first time. Somewhere, Lena slept without her knife, safe in the knowledge that she was home. And Ethan Cole, who'd thought his story ended with loss and grief, discovered that it had really only just begun. The blizzard had brought them together. Love had made them family. And every sunrise since had been a gift they'd earned by refusing to give up, by choosing to stand when standing was hard, by believing that sometimes, if you're brave enough and stubborn enough and love fiercely enough, you can take broken pieces and build something whole, something beautiful, something worth everything it cost to protect. He sat there until the stars wheeled overhead and the moon set behind the mountains, thinking about second chances and chosen families and how the worst storms sometimes bring the greatest gifts. Then he went inside, checked on each sleeping child one final time, and went to his own bed with a heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. Tomorrow there would be chores and challenges, arguments and adventures, all the chaos and joy of raising 23 children. But tonight there was peace. And in the quiet of a house filled with breathing, with life, with love, Ethan Cole closed his eyes and slept without nightmares for the first time in 2 years. Because he wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. They were family, and they were home.